A gleaming white Rolls-Royce purred to a stop along the immaculate curb of Maple Grove Court. Kendrick Hale settled the vehicle into park, its pristine finish catching the late morning sun. He had arrived early for the strategy meeting, as was his habit. Preparation and precision had served him well over decades of building his company from nothing. The tree-lined street stretched before him, a picture of suburban perfection. Identical rows of pruned hedges and manicured lawns surrounded colonial-style homes with glossy front doors. Kendrick adjusted his dark suit jacket and reached for his leather portfolio, ready to review the acquisition documents one final time before the discussion. He had just stepped out of the car when movement caught his eye. Sophia Langston emerged from behind her oversized front door, her designer heels clicking rapidly against the concrete of her driveway. Her face was already twisted with suspicion and anger as she approached, designer handbag swinging from her arm. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet street. "Whose car is that?" Kendrick turned toward her slowly, maintaining his composed demeanor. "Good morning, Mrs. Langston. I'm Kendrick Hale. I'm here early for our scheduled meeting this afternoon. That car—" Sophia cut him off, jabbing a manicured finger toward the Rolls-Royce. "Where did you get it? Who does it belong to?" "As I was saying, I'm Kendrick Hale. The car belongs to me," he replied evenly, reaching for his briefcase where his documentation was stored. Sophia let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please. You expect me to believe that? In this neighborhood?" She took another step forward, her voice rising. "I want to know right now whose car you've stolen and why you're lurking outside my house." Movement flickered in nearby windows. A woman walking her small dog across the street slowed her pace, openly staring. Two houses down, a man paused while watering his flowers, garden hose forgotten in his hand. "Mrs. Langston," Kendrick said carefully, his tone remaining professional despite the growing audience. "I understand your concern, but I assure you—" "Don't you dare patronize me," Sophia snapped, her voice echoing off the brick facades. "I know every person who belongs in this neighborhood, and you, most certainly, do not." She emphasized the last words with clear disdain, looking him up and down as if his tailored suit meant nothing. More neighbors appeared. A teenage boy stopped his bike at the corner. An older couple emerged onto their front porch, whispering to each other. The quiet street had become an impromptu theater, with Sophia playing to her growing audience. "I've lived here for years," she announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "and I know what kind of people drive these kinds of cars." She gestured dismissively toward Kendrick, "And they don't look like you." Kendrick felt the familiar weight of these moments settle across his shoulders. He had faced them before in college, in boardrooms, in country clubs, the constant requirement to prove his right to occupy spaces others took for granted. He kept his expression neutral, even as he noted curtains twitching in nearly every house on the street. "Mrs. Langston, I have all the documentation for the vehicle right here," he began, maintaining eye contact, "as well as the meeting confirmation from your husband's office. If you'll allow me to—" "Oh, I'm sure you have documentation," Sophia interrupted with a sneer. "I'm sure you have all sorts of papers, but that doesn't explain why you're hanging around our homes in the middle of the day when everyone's at work." A small crowd had gathered now, maintaining what they probably thought was a discreet distance. Some had phones out recording the confrontation. The sun beat down on the scene, harsh and revealing, as Sophia continued her public performance of outrage. "This is exactly what's wrong with society today," she declared to her audience. "People thinking they can just walk into decent neighborhoods and take whatever they want. Well, not here. Not in my neighborhood." Kendrick stood perfectly still, his hand still resting on his briefcase. Decades of experience had taught him that any movement, any flash of justified anger would only feed into her narrative. The weight of eyes on him was familiar, the same weight he had carried while building his company, while closing deals, while proving himself over and over in rooms where he was the only black man present. Sophia pulled her phone from her designer bag, her movements dramatic and purposeful. Her fingers jabbed at the screen as she kept her eyes locked on Kendrick, her expression full of righteous satisfaction. "Since you won't tell me the truth about whose car you've stolen," she announced, raising the phone to her ear, "I'm calling people who will get answers." She straightened her spine, clearly relishing her perceived power in the moment. "Yes, hello. I need to report a suspicious person with a stolen vehicle." The morning sun continued to shine brilliantly on the pristine white Rolls-Royce, the same sun that illuminated the ring of neighbors now openly watching. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, concern, and, from a few, discomfort at the scene unfolding before them. Yet none stepped forward to intervene as Sophia began her performance for the 911 operator, her finger still pointed accusingly at Kendrick like a judge pronouncing sentence. Two police cruisers rolled into Maple Grove Court, their arrival breaking the tense standoff. Sophia's face lit up with vindication as she hurried toward the vehicles, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. Officer Isabella Torres stepped out first, followed by her partner, Officer Derek Vaughn. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Sophia called out, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "That man over there, he's trying to steal this expensive car, in broad daylight. Can you believe the nerve?" Kendrick remained where he stood, one hand resting lightly on the Rolls-Royce's polished hood. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, making the white paint gleam like a spotlight. More neighbors had gathered, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Some held phones up, recording everything. Officer Torres approached carefully, her expression professional but guarded. "Sir, could you step away from the vehicle, please?" "Of course, officer." Kendrick's voice remained steady as he took two measured steps back. His movements were deliberate, non-threatening, a dance he had performed too many times before. "See how cooperative he's being," Sophia stage whispered loudly. "That's because he knows he's caught. I saw him lurking here, casing our homes, probably." Officer Torres held up a hand to quiet Sophia. "Ma'am, please, let us handle this." She turned back to Kendrick. "Sir, I'll need to see your identification and vehicle registration." "Certainly." Kendrick reached slowly for his briefcase, maintaining eye contact with the officer. "The registration is in the glove compartment. Would you like me to retrieve it?" "I'll get it," Officer Vaughn volunteered, moving toward the passenger side. Kendrick produced his driver's license and handed it to Officer Torres. Sophia craned her neck to see, her lips pursed in anticipation of being proved right. "Kendrick Hale," Officer Torres read aloud, studying the ID carefully. "That must be fake," Sophia interjected immediately. "Anyone can get fake ID these days. You should run it through your system." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Someone whispered, "She might have a point." Another voice added, "Never seen him around here before." Officer Vaughn emerged from the car with the registration papers. He compared them to the license, then showed them to his partner. Officer Torres examined both documents carefully before looking back at Kendrick. "These appear to be in order, Mr. Hale," she said. Sophia's face flushed red. "No, that's impossible. Check again. Those documents have to be forged." She pulled out her phone, starting to record. "I'm documenting this whole thing for everyone's safety, of course." Kendrick felt the familiar burn of humiliation beneath his calm exterior. Every pair of eyes on the street seemed to pierce him, questioning his right to stand there, to own something beautiful, to exist in this space. "The documents are legitimate, Mrs. Langston," Officer Torres stated firmly. "The vehicle is registered to Mr. Hale." "Well, there must be some mistake," Sophia insisted, her voice rising higher. "Look at him. Look at this car. Do you really think someone like him could afford a Rolls-Royce?" She gestured wildly, with her free hand while keeping her phone trained on Kendrick. "This is a safe neighborhood. We have standards here." The words hung in the air like poison. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Officer Vaughn ran the plates through their system while Officer Torres maintained her position between Kendrick and Sophia. "Everything checks out," Officer Vaughn confirmed after a moment. "The vehicle belongs to Mr. Hale." Sophia's nostrils flared. "No, no, no, this is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? Who my husband is?" She stepped closer, her phone still recording. "My husband is an executive at one of the biggest logistics companies in the country. We know what sorts of people can afford cars like this." The sun continued to beat down on the scene, highlighting every detail of this public theater. Sophia's righteous anger, the officer's professional discomfort, the neighbor's watchful stares, and Kendrick's carefully maintained composure. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Sophia demanded of the officers. "This man shows up in our neighborhood in this car and you're just going to take his word for it? People like him don't just show up in cars like that. They don't belong here." Each word was another cut, precisely aimed and delivered with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for their assumptions. Kendrick stood perfectly still, his suit jacket growing warm in the midday heat, watching Sophia perform for her audience. She was marking her territory, asserting ownership not just of her street, but of truth itself. Mrs. Langston, Officer Torres tried again. We've verified the vehicle's ownership. There's no crime being committed here. Oh, there's definitely a crime, Sophia snapped, still filming. Maybe not one you can see, but I know better. My husband works for a major logistics firm. We know what success looks like in this town, and it doesn't look like him. Kendrick allowed the weight of Sophia's words to settle in the summer air. Her phone remained pointed at him, recording every moment of what she clearly thought would be her triumph. The gathered neighbors shifted their weight from foot to foot, caught between discomfort and curiosity in the unfolding drama. And what exactly does your husband's company have to do with this situation, Mrs. Langston? Kendrick's voice carried across the driveway with perfect clarity, each word measured and precise. Sophia's lips curled into a smug smile. Everything. My husband is an executive there. We know every important person in the industry, and I can tell you right now, there's no way. I own your husband's company. 5 words, simple, direct, delivered without anger or satisfaction. Just a statement of fact that crashed into Sophia's performance like a wrecking ball through glass. The phone in Sophia's hand wavered. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. But no sound emerged. Several neighbors who had been nodding along with her accusations now exchanged uncertain glances. Officer Torres's eyebrows rose slightly as she watched the color drain from Sophia's face. Officer Vaughn took a small step back, suddenly very interested in studying the perfectly manicured lawn. That's impossible, Sophia finally managed, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. You're lying. Recently, I acquired controlling interest in Langston Transport Holdings, Kendrick continued, his calm unchanged. Your husband, Phillip Langston, specifically requested an afternoon meeting to discuss his concerns about the transition. He gestured toward his briefcase. I arrived early to review the relevant documents before our discussion. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the neighbors who had been recording the confrontation slowly lowered his phone, as if suddenly aware he was documenting something very different from what he had expected. Sophia's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she finally lowered her own phone. No, she said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. No, Philip would have told me if... Perhaps, Kendrick said quietly, there are many things your husband hasn't told you. The watching crowd had grown painfully still. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Officer Torres cleared her throat softly. Mr. Hale, would you like to press any charges regarding this incident? She asked, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of something else. Perhaps respect. Perhaps amusement. That won't be necessary, officer, Kendrick replied. I believe Mrs. Langston was simply being vigilant about her neighborhood security. The word vigilant hung in the air like smoke, its true meaning clear to everyone present. Sophia's face flushed deep red, the color spreading down her neck and across her chest. I need to make a call, Sophia announced, her voice pitched higher than before. Her fingers fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping it as she tried to dial. The same phone that moments ago had been her weapon was now her lifeline. Several neighbors began to drift away, suddenly finding their own lawns and homes intensely interesting. Others lingered, unable to tear themselves away from the spectacle of Sophia Langston's authority crumbling in real time. Officer Vaughn shifted his weight uncomfortably. Well, if there are no charges... Sophia's voice cracked as she jabbed at her phone screen. This isn't... Philip will explain everything. Kendrick stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed but dignified. He didn't need to move or speak. The truth had done all the necessary work. Philip! Sophia's voice rose sharply as her call connected. Philip, you need to come outside right now, right now! She was practically shouting into the phone, her composure completely shattered. There's a man here who's saying, no, listen to me. He's saying he owns the company. The police are here, just come outside. Officer Torres exchanged a look with her partner, then turned to Kendrick. Mr. Hale, we apologize for any inconvenience. You're free to go about your business. Thank you, officers. You've handled this situation very professionally. Kendrick's words carried clearly enough that several remaining neighbors could hear the contrast between his composure and Sophia's continuing phone hysteria. Philip, I don't care what you're doing. Get out here this instant. Sophia had begun pacing in short, sharp lines across her driveway. The whole neighborhood is watching. You have to come explain that this man is lying about. Her voice trailed off as she stared at whatever response her husband was giving. The phone shook visibly in her hand. The officers began walking back to their cruisers, though Officer Torres kept glancing back as if making sure the situation wouldn't escalate again. The remaining neighbors tried to look casual while straining to hear Sophia's increasingly desperate phone conversation. What do you mean you'll be right there? Sophia's voice had dropped to a harsh whisper. Philip! Philip! She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it, her face a mask of confusion and growing dread. The front door opened with a sharp click. Phillip Langston emerged, his expression twisted with annoyance as he adjusted his tie. Sophia, what is all this commotion about? I was in the middle of. His words died in his throat. The color drained from his face as his eyes locked onto Kendrick standing beside the white Rolls-Royce. The transformation was instant and dramatic, from irritated husband to terrified executive in the space of a heartbeat. Mr. Hale, Philip managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The name emerged strangled, as if fighting its way past a sudden constriction in his throat. Sophia's head snapped between her husband and Kendrick, her perfectly made-up face crumpling in confusion. The phone she'd been clutching like a weapon slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the driveway. You know him? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Philip stepped forward mechanically, his movement stiff and unnatural. Sophia, this is Kendrick Hale. He's the new majority owner of Langston Transport Holdings. Each word seemed to cost him physical effort. We completed the acquisition recently. The remaining neighbors leaned forward slightly, not even pretending to mind their own business anymore. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Sophia's face as her last certainties crumbled. But you never said, she started, then stopped looking lost. Mr. Hale, Philip continued, his voice rising to an unnaturally bright pitch. I apologize profusely for this unfortunate misunderstanding. My wife didn't realize. He gestured vaguely, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the mild temperature. Officer Torres watched the exchange with sharp eyes, her hand resting casually near her notepad. Even Officer Vaughn had stopped his retreat to the patrol car, sensing something off in Philip's manner. I'm so sorry, Sophia burst out suddenly, the words tumbling over each other. If I had known who you were, I never would have. You understand, don't you? We have to be careful about. Her voice trailed off as she realized how her words sounded. Several neighbors winced visibly. About what exactly, Mrs. Langston? Kendrick asked quietly. His tone was mild, but the question hung in the air like a sword. Sophia's mouth worked silently for a moment. About. Suspicious. About strangers in the neighborhood, she finished weakly. Philip's hand shot out to grip his wife's arm, stopping her from speaking further. Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside, he said quickly. The meeting wasn't scheduled for another hour. But since you're here, Kendrick studied Philip's face carefully. The man's fear went beyond simple embarrassment at his wife's behavior. There was something desperate in his eyes, something hunted. It reminded Kendrick of executives he had seen just before major fraud investigations broke. That same cornered look, that same barely controlled panic. Of course, Kendrick replied smoothly, though I believe the officers haven't quite finished their report. Officer Torres stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Langston, we do need to document this incident, standard procedure when emergency services are called. Her tone was professional, but her eyes hadn't missed Philip's growing agitation. Is that really necessary? Philip asked, his voice cracking slightly, since Mr. Hale isn't pressing charges. It's protocol, Officer Vaughn chimed in, having drifted back to join his partner, especially given the nature of the original call. Sophia had begun to cry silently, careful tears that didn't disturb her makeup. But Kendrick noticed she kept glancing at her husband rather than the officers, seeking cues, reading his reactions. Her apologies weren't about remorse. They were about realizing she'd accidentally challenged someone with more power than she had. I really am sorry, she tried again, this time directing her words to Kendrick. If I'd known you were coming to meet Philip, then the color of my skin wouldn't have been an issue. Kendrick finished for her, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made several observers flinch. Philip's face went even paler, if that was possible. Mr. Hale, please, Philip said. We should discuss the transition plans. I have all the documents ready inside. Officer Torres finished writing in her notepad, her pen moving deliberately across the page. We'll need statements from both of you, she said to the Langstons, for the record. Philip's hand was still locked around Sophia's arm, his knuckles white with tension. He nodded jerkily, then turned to Kendrick with an attempt at a professional smile that came across more like a grimace. Shall we go inside, Mike? He asked, gesturing toward the front door. We can get started while the officers complete their paperwork. Kendrick picked up his briefcase and moved toward the house. As he passed Philip, he caught a whispered exchange between husband and wife. Why didn't you tell me? Sophia hissed. Not now, Philip muttered back urgently. Then, so quietly, Kendrick almost missed it. This is the worst possible night for this. The words carried the weight of genuine dread, confirming Kendrick's growing suspicion that Sophia's racist assumptions had accidentally exposed something far more troubling at the heart of the company he had just acquired. The Langston home's grand foyer gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Sophia hurried ahead, her heels clicking against the floor as she tried to transform from accuser to hostess. Please make yourself comfortable in the dining room, Mr. Hale. Everything's ready. Kendrick noted how quickly she'd switched to a sugary voice that didn't match her earlier venom. The dining room was a study in expensive taste, dark mahogany table, silk curtains, and carefully arranged place settings that sparkled under recessed lighting. Philip pulled out a chair at the head of the table. Mr. Hale, please. You should sit here. His hands shook slightly as he gestured to the seat. Thank you. Kendrick settled into the chair, laying his briefcase beside him. The leather felt like armor against his leg, filled with the preliminary reports he had been reviewing before Sophia's accusation. Sophia appeared with a bottle of wine, her smile fixed and brittle. This is a lovely Bordeaux. I hope you enjoy red wine. Her fingers trembled as she poured, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. That's fine. Kendrick watched her carefully controlled movements. Every gesture screamed of someone desperate to pretend the last hour hadn't happened. I've prepared cocoa, she announced, her voice too bright. It's a family recipe. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and nervous energy. Philip spread papers across his end of the table, talking rapidly about quarterly projections. As you can see, our numbers are quite strong. The merger transition has been smoother than expected in most departments. Most departments. Kendrick picked up the subtle qualifier. Minor adjustment issues, nothing unusual for an acquisition of this size. Philip's answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Sophia returned with steaming plates, setting them down with exaggerated care. The food was artfully arranged, but Kendrick noticed how her hand shook as she placed his plate, as if the mere act of serving him challenged everything she believed about the proper order of things. I hope everything is to your satisfaction, she said, sinking into her chair. Her perfect posture couldn't hide how she perched on the edge of her seat like a bird ready to flee. Kendrick took a small bite, then turned back to Philip. I noticed some concerning patterns in the preliminary reports, several discrimination complaints in the past year, all dismissed without investigation. Philip's fork clattered against his plate. Those were thoroughly reviewed by HR standard procedure. The same HR department that hasn't promoted a single minority employee above middle management in years. Kendrick kept his tone mild, but the question landed like a stone in still water. Sophia's knife scraped across her plate with a sharp sound. Well, one has to consider fit, she said, apparently unable to help herself. Company culture is so important. Sophia, Philip's warning came too late. I only mean, she continued, wine glass halfway to her lips, that some people simply aren't suited to certain positions. It's about maintaining standards. Standards? Kendrick let the word hang in the air. Like assuming a black man in a Rolls-Royce must be a thief. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia's face flushed red, then pale. Philip jumped in, shuffling more papers. About those contract negotiations you mentioned earlier, I have the full breakdown here. I also noticed several major accounts were lost last quarter, Kendrick continued, ignoring the attempt at deflection. All minority-owned businesses, all with excellent payment histories. Market fluctuations, Philip said quickly. Natural turnover in a competitive industry. And the fact that they were all replaced by companies connected to board members' private interests. Philip's fake smile cracked slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Kendrick took another careful bite. I'm asking direct questions about patterns that concern me. Sophia stood abruptly, wine sloshing in her glass. I'll check on dessert. Her retreat to the kitchen carried an edge of panic. Mr. Hale, Philip leaned forward, voice low and urgent. I know today's incident was unfortunate, but I assure you the company is stable. The last thing we need is unnecessary disruption. Unnecessary disruption, Kendrick repeated. Is that what you call accountability? Sophia returned with an elaborate chocolate torte, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. I do hope you'll stay for dessert, she said, her social mask slipping to reveal desperation underneath. We should put this afternoon's misunderstanding behind us. Some things shouldn't be put behind us, Kendrick replied. They should be brought into the light and examined carefully. The rest of the dinner passed in strained conversation. Philip kept steering topics toward safe territory, market projections, facility upgrades, efficiency metrics. Sophia alternated between forced cheerfulness and barely concealed resentment, each attempt at small talk revealing deeper prejudices. By the time Kendrick stood to leave, the sun had set outside the dining room's tall windows. Sophia's perfect hostess facade had crumbled into exhausted silence. Philip's polished executive demeanor had developed visible cracks, revealing something darker beneath. Thank you for dinner, Kendrick said formally, retrieving his briefcase. We'll continue our discussion about those reports soon. The evening's shadows were deepening as he walked to his car. Once inside the Rolls-Royce, he pulled out his phone and dialed quickly. Naomi, we need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. He glanced back at the Langston house where Philip stood watching from a window. Something's very wrong inside the company, and I need your legal expertise to uncover exactly what it is. Kendrick's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise. Early the next morning, the space was silent, except for the soft hum of climate control and the occasional ding of early elevator arrivals far below. The sun hadn't fully risen, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Naomi Hale arrived precisely on time, her leather briefcase stuffed with preliminary acquisition documents she had grabbed after her father's call the night before. She found Kendrick standing at the window, still wearing yesterday's suit. Did you even go home? She asked, setting her coffee on the conference table. Couldn't sleep? Kendrick turned from the window. Despite his wrinkled clothes, his eyes were sharp and focused. Something about that dinner kept nagging at me, the way Philip reacted. It wasn't just embarrassment over Sophia's behavior. Tell me everything. Naomi pulled out her laptop and legal pad. Kendrick described the afternoon in detail, Sophia's immediate hostility, her performance for the gathering neighbors, the police response, and Philip's telling reaction. As he spoke, Naomi took rapid notes, her attorney's mind already categorizing potential legal implications. The dinner was worse, Kendrick continued, pacing slowly. Sophia kept making these little comments about fit and standards, but Philip, he was terrified of any questions about HR practices or lost contracts. Show me the workforce data that bothered you. Naomi opened several spreadsheets. Kendrick pulled up the company's personnel files on the conference room screen. Look at the promotion patterns in Philip's division over the last several years. I initially wrote it off as coincidence during the acquisition review, but now we know it might be policy rather than chance. Naomi's fingers flew across her keyboard. We need to move carefully but quickly. If Philip suspects we're investigating, he'll start covering tracks. Kendrick sank into a chair, allowing himself to show the first signs of strain. I kept my composure yesterday because I had to, but watching Sophia perform her outrage, seeing those neighbors gather to watch, he shook his head. It brought back memories I thought I'd put behind me. Dad! Naomi stopped typing and met his eyes. Your composure isn't weakness. It's exactly what makes you dangerous to people like the Langstons. They expect anger they can dismiss. Your dignity forces them to face their own ugliness. You sound like your mother, Kendrick said softly, smiling slightly. She taught us both well. Naomi returned to her laptop with renewed focus. Now, let's build this investigation properly. We need a complete audit, but it has to be subtle. No formal announcements, no obvious document requests. They spent the next hour mapping out their strategy. Naomi created a detailed timeline for reviewing different aspects of company operations, promotion histories, vendor contracts, internal communications, and previous legal settlements. I'll start with HR files, she said, organizing her notes, looking for patterns in hiring, promotions, and departures. Then we'll trace the contract changes you noticed. See who benefited from dropping those minority-owned vendors. Sophia's public accusation might actually help us, Kendrick realized. Phillip will expect me to be distracted by that incident. He won't anticipate a deeper investigation so soon. Exactly. Naomi pulled up another document. And speaking of Sophia's performance, I've already requested the police body cam footage. If she made any explicitly discriminatory statements, we can use that to establish a pattern of bias that might extend into company culture. The early morning light grew stronger as they worked, casting long shadows across the office floor. Outside, the city was coming alive, but they remained focused on their task, methodically building the framework for their investigation. As morning progressed, they heard the first employees arriving in the outer office. Naomi immediately switched to a different screen, maintaining their cover of a routine morning meeting. I'll coordinate with our inside counsel, she said, keeping her voice professional as footsteps passed the door. We'll need their cooperation, but carefully managed to avoid tipping our hand. Kendrick nodded, straightening his tie. I have meetings with department heads all day. I'll pay special attention to how they interact with their minority staff members. Sometimes the small moments tell the bigger story. They worked steadily through the morning hours. Suddenly, Naomi sat up straighter, her eyes locked on her screen. Dad, she said quietly, look at this promotion record from Phillip's division. Kendrick moved to look over her shoulder. The spreadsheet showed a clear pattern. Qualified black employees repeatedly passed over for advancement, their positions filled by less experienced white candidates. Devin Harris, Naomi pointed to one name. MBA from Wharton, years with the company, consistently excellent performance reviews, passed over multiple times for promotion to regional manager. Each time, the position went to someone with far less experience. And there are more like this? Kendrick asked, though he already knew the answer. Many more, Naomi confirmed, scrolling through the data. This isn't coincidence, Dad. This is systematic. The morning sun now filled the office with harsh light, illuminating the first solid evidence of what they both suspected. Sophia's driveway accusation wasn't an isolated incident of prejudice. It was merely the public face of a deeper, more insidious system of discrimination that had flourished under Phillip Langston's leadership. The executive conference room felt smaller with just 3 people inside. Kendrick sat at the head of the long table, Naomi beside him with her laptop open. Across from them, Carla Simmons smoothed her blazer with practiced calm, but her fingers trembled slightly. I appreciate you meeting with us privately, Kendrick said. We're reviewing some personnel patterns that caught our attention. Carla nodded carefully. What would you like to know? Tell us about your experience with promotions in the regional operations division, Naomi suggested, her tone professional but gentle. Carla's shoulders tensed, then deliberately relaxed. I've been with the company for years, started as a shift coordinator, worked my way up to regional operations manager. She paused, choosing her words. I've applied for the director position multiple times. And what happened? Kendrick asked, though the personnel files had already told them. I trained them, Carla said quietly. All the men who got the job instead of me. Each time I was told they had leadership presence or executive potential, but I had taught them everything they knew about our operations. Kendrick watched her face, noting the careful control in her expression. This wasn't fresh pain. It was an old ache she had learned to carry. The last one, Carla continued, he had been with us barely a few years, asked me to show him our inventory management system because he'd never handled anything that complex. Months later, he was my boss. Naomi typed steadily, documenting every detail. Did you ever raise concerns about these decisions? Carla's laugh held no humor. Filed a formal complaint about discriminatory promotion practices. HR said they'd investigate. Weeks later, they concluded everything was according to policy. She straightened a paperclip on the table. The next quarter, my performance review mentioned I needed to work on being more collaborative. The morning light through the windows felt colder somehow. Kendrick recognized the pattern, how systemic discrimination wrapped itself in professional language and procedural details. They thanked Carla and took a brief break before Jerome Watkins arrived. The veteran dispatcher's gray hair and weathered face spoke to decades of experience. He settled into the chair with the careful movements of someone who had learned to navigate troubled waters. Mr. Watkins, Kendrick began, we understand you've been with the company for many years. Almost 30, Jerome corrected mildly. Started when we still use paper logs for everything. That's quite a perspective, Naomi noted. You must have seen a lot of changes. Some things change, Jerome's eyes held a lifetime of observation. Some stay the same, just get better at hiding. Over the next hour, Jerome described a pattern of complaints that vanished into administrative black holes. Safety concerns from minority drivers that never reached review boards, scheduling conflicts that always seemed to disadvantage certain employees. There was this young woman, Maria Lopez, he recalled, brilliant with logistics, knew every route and regulation, filed a complaint about harassment from one of Philip's friends in management. Next thing we knew, she was transferred to the night shift. Months later, she quit. Had two small kids, couldn't handle those hours. Kendrick felt his jaw tighten. And this happened often? Often enough that people stopped complaining, Jerome said simply. Why risk your job when you know nothing will change? Naomi pulled up internal records on her laptop, cross-referencing dates and names. Every story matched the documentation, but the official versions were sanitized, wrapped in corporate language that masked the human cost. Through the afternoon, more employees shared similar experiences. Each story was unique, but the pattern was consistent. Careers stalled, complaints buried, opportunities redirected through unofficial channels that always seemed to lead back to Philip's office. It's like watching a magic trick, Naomi said during a break between interviews. Once you know how it works, you see all the misdirection. Every discriminatory decision has a plausible explanation on paper. Kendrick stood at the window looking down at the city below. Sophia Langston didn't invent her assumptions about who belongs where. She learned them from somewhere. He turned back to his daughter. This company taught her that power has a particular face, and Philip reinforced it through every promotion, every dismissed complaint, every business decision that just happened to maintain the status quo, Naomi added, reviewing her notes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the conference room floor when Kendrick's phone buzzed. The message was from a board member he trusted. Phillip Langston was making rounds among key executives, describing Kendrick as emotionally unstable and taking things personally after the incident with Sophia. Kendrick set the phone down carefully. The same poison that had flowed through Sophia's accusations now moved through corporate channels, wrapped in concerns about stability and objectivity. But this time, Kendrick had more than his dignity as a weapon. He had evidence, testimonies, and a daughter who knew how to use them. The truth was in the patterns, in the tired voices of people who had endured years of almost and not quite ready and not the right fit. Justice would need to reach deeper than one afternoon's public humiliation. It would need to uproot a system that had turned discrimination into policy and bias into business as usual. The executive boardroom hummed with quiet tension one morning. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany table where senior executives sat waiting. Phillip Langston stood at the front of the room, his silver hair perfect, his navy suit crisp, every inch the picture of corporate authority. I understand everyone's concern, Phillip said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Recent events have been unsettling, but we need to maintain perspective. He smiled, showing perfect white teeth. Change is always challenging, especially during acquisitions. Kendrick Hale sat quietly at the head of the table, watching Philip work the room like a conductor leading an orchestra he had rehearsed for years. Every gesture was calculated, every pause measured. Our new owner, Philip continued, glancing at Kendrick with carefully crafted concern, had an unfortunate encounter with my wife. A simple misunderstanding that seems to have affected his judgment. Kenneth Barlow, a board member with decades of influence, nodded sagely. His jowls quivered with false sympathy. We all understand how personal slights can cloud one's perspective. Exactly, Philip agreed. And now we're seeing rather impulsive decisions, demanding personnel files, questioning established vendor relationships, reopening old complaints that were thoroughly investigated years ago. Kendrick noticed the subtle signals passing between certain executives, shared glances, small nods, the old guard closing ranks. But he also saw newer faces shifting uncomfortably, their loyalty to the system not quite cemented. I appreciate your concern for my judgment, Philip, Kendrick said quietly. The room fell silent. So let's examine some numbers with clear eyes. He opened a folder. Can you explain why minority candidates with advanced degrees and decades of experience were passed over for promotion far more often than their white counterparts in your division? Philip's smile never wavered. Promotion decisions involve complex factors beyond simple qualifications: leadership fit, cultural alignment. Cultural alignment, Kendrick repeated, like Carla Simmons training several successive men who became her supervisor. Ms. Simmons is a valuable employee, Philip said smoothly, but director-level positions require certain intangible qualities. Kenneth Barlow cleared his throat. We've always maintained high standards for leadership roles, standards that have served this company well. Speaking of standards, Kendrick continued, why are we paying Vertex Solutions well above market rate for basic logistics software? The same software other vendors offered at significantly lower costs. A younger executive near the end of the table sat up straighter. Philip's response came quickly. Vertex's proprietary features justify the premium. Their track record includes multiple lawsuits for contract fraud, Kendrick interrupted, and their CEO plays golf with you every Sunday. The room temperature seemed to drop. Philip's polish cracked slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a tension in his jaw. I'm concerned that personal grievances are being transformed into baseless accusations. Then let's base them on facts, Kendrick said. Where are the internal review files for complaints filed in recent years? Human Resources shows them as submitted for executive review, but they never reached final documentation. Administrative oversights happen in any large organization, Kenneth offered quickly, especially during disruptions. Interesting that these particular oversights affected every discrimination complaint filed during that period, Kendrick noted, while other HR paperwork processed normally. Philip stepped forward, his voice hardening beneath its professional veneer. Mr. Hale, if you're suggesting impropriety, I'm not suggesting anything, Kendrick said. I'm asking direct questions about documented patterns that coincidentally benefited certain executives while disadvantaging others based on very specific characteristics. The room divided itself in subtle ways. Some executives stared at their laptops, avoiding eye contact. Others sat straighter, watching the exchange with new interest. A few glanced nervously at Philip, like courtiers, gauging which way power was flowing. Perhaps we should table this discussion, Kenneth suggested, until emotions are less charged. My emotions are perfectly steady, Kendrick replied, which is why I can clearly see the difference between a misunderstanding and a methodology. One happens by accident, the other happens by design. Philip's smile had become a mask stretched thin over growing fear. We've built this company's success on proven leadership principles. You've built it on buried complaints and inflated contracts, Kendrick corrected. On qualified people pushed aside because they didn't fit your image of authority. That ends now. The afternoon sun had shifted, throwing Philip's shadow long across the boardroom floor. His polished exterior couldn't quite hide the calculation behind his eyes as he realized this was not a man he could simply maneuver around. I move that we adjourn for today, Kenneth announced quickly. Give everyone time to review the concerns raised. The meeting dispersed in clusters of whispered conversations and worried glances. Philip departed with his usual measured stride, but his neck was flushed red above his collar. Kendrick remained seated, watching the power dynamics shift like weather patterns across the room. As evening approached, his phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. A staff assistant had called their office, worried about conversations she had overheard. Sophia Langston was busy at the Willow Creek Country Club, telling anyone who would listen about her terrifying encounter with an aggressive man who was threatening her husband's company. The poison was spreading through social channels while Philip worked the corporate angles. Kendrick set down his phone. The battlefield had expanded beyond the boardroom, but that didn't change his strategy. Truth could be twisted, but facts left paper trails, and he had only begun to follow them. Sophia Langston's living room gleamed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Several women perched on cream-colored sofas, wine glasses held delicately, as Sophia dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I was terrified, she said, her voice trembling, standing there alone, confronting this man who appeared from nowhere in our peaceful neighborhood. She took a steadying sip of Chardonnay. If the police hadn't arrived when they did, Patricia Morgan, president of the Country Club Women's Association, reached over to pat Sophia's knee. You poor thing. How absolutely dreadful. The worst part, Sophia continued, setting her glass down on the marble coffee table, is how he's now using his position to target Philip, making wild accusations demanding investigations. She lowered her voice. All because I dared to question why he was lurking near our home. The women exchanged knowing looks. This version of events, carefully curated and elegantly served alongside imported cheese, felt comfortably familiar. It fit their understanding of the world, a brave homeowner, a suspicious stranger. The natural order disrupted. I heard he's been quite aggressive in board meetings, said Margaret Wheeler, whose husband golfed with Philip, throwing around accusations of discrimination, if you can imagine. She rolled her eyes. It's so tiresome how they always play that card. Sophia nodded gratefully. Philip has built that company with integrity for years now. This man swoops in looking for revenge over a simple misunderstanding. Across town in Kendrick's home office, a different scene unfolded. He and Naomi sat watching cell phone videos that had begun circulating online. The clips were brief, shot from various angles by neighbors. Each captured fragments of the confrontation, but none showed the full context. She's screaming at the man in the Rolls. OMG, police called on suspicious person in the neighborhood. Rich lady stands up to car thief. Plot twist at end. Comments below the videos ranged from openly racist to supposedly concerned about neighborhood safety. Sophia's version of events spread through every post, growing more dramatic with each retelling. They're painting you as unstable, Naomi said, scrolling through social media. Dangerous, someone who bought the company just to settle a score. She looked up at her father. We need to get ahead of this narrative before it solidifies. Kendrick stood by the window watching night settle over the city. Responding emotionally is exactly what they want. It would validate every stereotype Sophia's selling to her friends. But staying silent lets them control the story, Naomi argued. Every hour we wait, her lies sink deeper into people's minds. Truth needs evidence, Kendrick replied, not just denial. His phone buzzed with another message, this time from a country club member apologetically canceling their regular Saturday golf game. The excuse was polite, carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. Sophia's campaign was working. They're trying to isolate you socially while Philip undermines you professionally, Naomi said. It's a coordinated attack. Kendrick nodded. Because they understand power isn't just about position, it's about belonging. They're telling everyone I don't belong in their world, not in their neighborhood, not in their company, not in their social circles. Back at the Langston home, Sophia's performance reached its crescendo. I feel unsafe in my own home, she whispered, voice breaking perfectly. Philip says he's becoming obsessed with finding ways to punish us, demanding private files, questioning longtime executives. She gestured helplessly. All because I tried to protect our community. You were absolutely right to be suspicious, Patricia assured her. We have to be vigilant these days. Standards are dropping everywhere. The other women murmured agreement. They had heard similar stories at other garden parties, charity luncheons, club gatherings, stories that always ended with their way of life under threat from outsiders who didn't appreciate their values. We're all behind you, Sophia, Margaret declared. The whole community knows what kind of people you and Philip are. In Kendrick's office, Naomi's laptop chimed with an incoming email. She had been running automated searches through company servers, looking for patterns in internal communications. Her eyes widened as she read. Dad, she said, look at this thread between Philip and the Vertex Solutions CEO. They're discussing special considerations for contract approval. The dates match those inflated software purchases exactly. Kendrick moved to read over her shoulder. More emails appeared, documentation of vendor meetings that never happened, altered bid comparisons, buried competitor proposals. The technical terms were vague, Naomi continued, but the payment patterns were clear. They were routing extra fees through shell companies tied to board members. Cross-reference those companies with Kenneth Barlow's financial disclosures, Kendrick instructed. Sophia's wine gathering was winding down, her friends departing with hugs and assurances of support. Each would spread her story further, adding their own embellishments, building a wall of polite disbelief around any truth that might threaten their carefully maintained reality. But in Kendrick's office, reality was assembling itself in electronic paper trails and financial records. Naomi's computer hummed as it compiled years of hidden transactions and buried decisions. The clock approached midnight. Spreadsheets filled with highlighted numbers glowed on Naomi's screen. She looked up at her father with fierce determination. "We've got them," she said. "These emails prove Phillip's division has been manipulating contracts and hiding kickbacks for years. The board can't ignore this level of documentation." The next morning arrived with deceptive promise. Naomi spread documents across the mahogany conference table in Kendrick's office, organizing evidence into clear categories. Red folders held promotion records showing qualified minority candidates consistently passed over. Blue folders contained vendor contracts with inflated costs. Green folders revealed Phillip's electronic trail of questionable decisions. "The pattern is undeniable," Naomi said, tapping the neat stacks. "Years of systematic discrimination and financial manipulation, all flowing through Phillip's division." Kendrick nodded, studying the executive summary she had prepared. "Clear enough for anyone willing to see it. That's the challenge." Naomi straightened her blazer. Getting the board to actually look. They had called an emergency session, giving board members just enough notice to attend, but not enough time for Phillip to mount a full defense. The strategy was surgical: present evidence too solid to dismiss, force immediate action, and break the cycle of delay that protected corruption. By mid-morning, the boardroom began filling. Kenneth Barlow arrived first, his silver hair perfect, his disapproval evident in every movement. Other directors followed, some curious, some concerned, some clearly already aligned against any disruption to their comfortable system. Phillip entered last, projecting calm confidence. He nodded to Kendrick as if the previous day's tension had never existed. "Quite a dramatic summons this morning." "The evidence warranted urgency," Kendrick replied evenly. Naomi distributed packets containing key documents carefully selected to demonstrate the scope of the problem without overwhelming detail. She remained standing, ready to walk the board through each section. "Before we begin," Phillip interrupted smoothly, "I feel compelled to address the elephant in the room." He looked around the table with practiced concern. This sudden investigation, these accusations, they didn't arise from routine oversight. They started immediately after an unfortunate incident at my home. Kenneth Barlow leaned forward. "What incident?" "A regrettable misunderstanding," Phillip said. "My wife expressed concern about an unknown person near our property. She had no way of knowing it was our new owner. Mr. Hale took understandable offense, but his response has become—" He paused delicately. "Disproportionate." "That's not accurate," Kendrick started. But Phillip pressed on. Within hours of that encounter, he launched this aggressive investigation, demanded private files, questioned long-standing executives, all while making inflammatory accusations about discrimination. Phillip spread his hands. "I respect Mr. Hale's accomplishments, but we can't let personal feelings override proper corporate governance." Kenneth Barlow nodded sagely. "Revenge is a poor basis for leadership decisions." "This has nothing to do with revenge," Naomi cut in. "The evidence speaks for itself." Page 3 shows clear patterns of promotional bias. Page 7 documents systematic contract manipulation, which Mr. Hale only began investigating after my wife embarrassed him, Phillip noted. Curious timing, wouldn't you say? Other board members shifted uncomfortably. The narrative was taking hold, not because it was true, but because it felt safer than confronting years of institutional rot. "The timing is irrelevant," Kendrick said firmly. "These documents prove serious misconduct." "They prove selective interpretation," Kenneth countered. "Any large company has complex personnel decisions and vendor relationships. Cherry-picking data to support a predetermined conclusion is dangerous, especially when motivated by personal grievance," Phillip added. Kendrick watched his momentum crumbling. The truth lay exposed in those folders, but Phillip had given the board permission to look away. They could dismiss justice as revenge, protect their comfortable world, and sleep easily, believing they had acted responsibly. "I move we table this discussion pending a formal review process," Kenneth announced. "These are serious allegations that deserve proper procedure, not rushed judgment." "Second," another director quickly agreed. "We can't delay action on clear evidence of misconduct," Naomi protested. "We also can't let emotion override proper governance," Phillip replied smoothly. "I welcome a thorough, balanced investigation through appropriate channels." The vote was quick and decisive, overwhelmingly in favor of delay. Phillip had transformed truth into a procedural inconvenience to be buried in committees and reviews. As the board members filed out, Kendrick's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, reporter from Channel 8 News requesting comment on harassment allegations from Sophia Langston. "Claims you've used company position to intimidate her family after neighborhood incident." Kendrick showed the message to Naomi. Her jaw tightened. They're not just deflecting the investigation, she said. They're attacking your credibility directly. Through the boardroom's glass walls, they watched Phillip speaking quietly with Kenneth Barlow and two other directors. His posture radiated reasonable concern, a man sadly forced to defend proper corporate order against emotional excess. He's turned the truth into a weapon against itself, Kendrick observed, made exposing wrongdoing look like proof of poor judgment. We have the evidence, Naomi insisted. We just need to find a way past their comfortable blindness, Kendrick finished. They'll bury facts in procedure because the truth threatens their world. We need something they can't ignore or reframe. His phone buzzed again, more reporters asking about Sophia's claims. The story was spreading, carefully shaped to paint him as unstable and vindictive. In less than an hour, Phillip had transformed clear evidence of corruption into a story about wounded pride and reckless retaliation. The evening news flickered across Kendrick's office wall. Channel 8's lead story showed Sophia Langston, perfectly composed in pearls and a cream blazer, describing her terrifying encounter with an aggressive stranger who turned out to be her husband's new boss. I was just trying to protect our neighborhood, she said, eyes wide with manufactured concern. Now he's using his position to target my family. The reporter's voiceover added false gravity. Questions are being raised about potential abuse of corporate power following a suburban confrontation. Kendrick muted the sound but left the images playing. He needed to witness how easily truth could be twisted, how his decades of building something honest could be recast as menace by someone who knew how to perform victimhood. We need to respond, Naomi insisted, pacing the office. Let me draft a statement. Show the investigation predates this incident. Release the promotion data. Kendrick shook his head. Phillip would love nothing more than for us to look defensive right now, so we just let them spread lies? No, he waited for the right moment. The truth matters more than my pride. His phone buzzed, another reporter requesting comment. The story was spreading across local stations, each version slightly more sensational. Business publications were starting to pick it up too, framing it as a cautionary tale about post-acquisition tensions. Naomi grabbed the remote and changed channels. There was Sophia again, this time on Channel 4, describing how uncomfortable she felt knowing someone she had mistakenly questioned now controlled her husband's company. She's good, Kendrick admitted quietly. Notice how she never quite says I threatened her, just implies it. Leaves space for imagination to do the work. That's why we need to. A knock interrupted them. Kendrick's assistant stepped in. Officer Torres is here, says it's important. Isabella Torres entered, still in uniform, but clearly off duty. She closed the door carefully before speaking. I've been watching the news coverage, she said. It doesn't match what I saw that day. Kendrick gestured for her to sit. How so? I can't discuss everything officially yet, but I reviewed my body camera notes and incident report. Mrs. Langston made several statements to us that directly contradicted what we observed on scene. She claimed you approached her property aggressively. Camera shows you never left the curb. Said you refused to provide identification. We have clear footage of you immediately cooperating. Torres paused. She also alleged you made threatening statements. The audio proves otherwise. That helps, Naomi said, but will it matter? Eventually. These things take time to process properly, but I wanted you to know. Some of us see what's happening here. After Torres left, Kendrick stood at his office window watching darkness settle over the city. The lights coming on in other buildings reminded him of all the people working late, trying to build something lasting in a world that could turn against them in an instant. You're exhausted, Naomi said softly. I'm angry, he corrected. Not at being accused. I've handled worse. I'm angry that somewhere in this company, people are suffering under the same system that produced the Langstons. Every day, they come to work knowing merit matters less than maintaining comfortable lies. Then we keep fighting. We do. But tonight, he sank into his chair. Tonight, I need to feel this, really feel what it costs to stand against people who have never had their right to exist questioned. Naomi squeezed his shoulder, understanding. She had seen him weather countless storms with unwavering dignity, but even mountains need moments to acknowledge the rain. The news channels kept running Sophia's interviews, social media amplified selected clips, comment sections filled with people who had never met him debating his character based on carefully edited fragments of truth. The loneliest part, he said after a long silence, is knowing how many people will choose comfort over justice. They'll watch these stories and think there must be more to it because the alternative threatens their world. Their comfort isn't our responsibility. No, but their victims are. Hours passed. Naomi worked quietly, building their case despite the setbacks. Kendrick reviewed quarterly reports, refusing to let scandal derail the actual work of running the company. Just past midnight, Naomi's laptop chimed with a new email. The sender was Brooke Sinclair, a compliance analyst in Phillip's division. The subject line read simply, "Evidence you need to see." The message itself was brief. "I can't keep quiet anymore. I have documents Mr. Langston never meant anyone to find. Internal communications, deleted reports, real vendor numbers. Please help make this right." Naomi looked up at Kendrick. "This could be—" "Don't say it yet," he cautioned. "We've had enough false summits today." But something in Brooke's words felt different. Not a promise of victory, just a reminder that even in systems built on polished lies, someone always knows the truth. And sometimes they find the courage to speak it. The next morning arrived with a gray drizzle that made the empty office building feel like a confessional. Brooke Sinclair sat ramrod straight in her chair, hands clasped tightly around a thick manila envelope. The overhead fluorescents hadn't even warmed up fully, casting strange shadows across the conference room. "Take your time," Kendrick said softly, noting how Brooke's fingers trembled. "You're safe here." Naomi placed a cup of coffee in front of Brooke, the gentle clink of ceramic breaking the tense silence. "We understand how difficult this must be." Brooke drew a shaky breath. "I've worked in compliance for years. I thought maybe I was imagining things at first. Little irregularities, promotion reviews that didn't add up, vendor contracts that seemed inflated." She pulled out a stack of papers, spreading them carefully across the table like pieces of a painful puzzle. "But then I started noticing patterns. Every time a minority employee filed a complaint, it would get routed through Mr. Langston's office, and somehow those files would always end up incomplete or missing key documentation." Kendrick picked up the first document, an email chain with multiple replies deliberately removed. But Brooke had preserved the original thread. In it, Phillip discussed maintaining appropriate cultural alignment in senior positions, followed by thinly veiled instructions to find reasons to block specific promotions. "How long have you been collecting these?" Naomi asked, already taking detailed notes. "Years." Brooke's voice cracked slightly. "At first, I just started keeping copies because something felt wrong. Then I saw qualified people getting passed over again and again. Carla Simmons should have been regional director years ago. Devin Harris had perfect evaluations but somehow never made it past middle management." She pulled out more papers, performance reviews with original high scores, later amended with vague concerns about leadership presence or organizational fit. "But this—" Brooke's hand shook as she removed a final printed email from her envelope. "This is what made me realize I couldn't stay quiet anymore." The message was dated shortly after the acquisition. Phillip had written to Kenneth Barlow, "Need to clean house before the new owner starts digging where he shouldn't. Too many loose ends in the quarterly reports. Get IT to do another sweep of the servers." Kendrick read it twice, his expression unchanged, but his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Did they know you had access to these communications?" Brooke shook her head. "I was supposed to be invisible, just another analyst processing paperwork. They never thought anyone was watching." "What made you decide to come forward now?" Naomi asked gently. Brooke's fingers twisted together. "I saw Mrs. Langston on the news last night, playing the victim, twisting everything around. And I thought about all the real victims, the people whose careers were destroyed, whose lives were affected." She looked directly at Kendrick. "I couldn't bear the weight of knowing any more." "Coming forward took tremendous courage," Kendrick said quietly. "I want you to know that we'll protect you. Whatever happens next, your job is secure." "It's not just about the job anymore," Brooke's voice strengthened slightly. "I need to be able to look in the mirror again." Naomi began organizing the documents into clear categories: discrimination evidence, financial irregularities, deleted communications. Each piece alone was damaging. Together, they revealed years of systematic corruption. Some of these vendor contracts, Naomi noted, show clear inflation patterns, always the same companies, always routed through Phillip's department. He has personal connections with most of those vendors, Brooke confirmed. Family, friends, golf partners. The real numbers are buried in secondary reports that never make it to final review. Kendrick studied a particularly telling email thread. This proves he knew exactly what he was doing. No ambiguity, no plausible deniability. The morning light grew stronger outside, but they remained focused on the evidence before them. Brooke explained each document's context, pointing out key names and dates. Her technical knowledge, combined with years of quiet observation, painted a devastating picture of power abused and truth buried. I should have spoken up sooner, Brooke said finally, exhaustion evident in her voice. You spoke up when it mattered most, Kendrick assured her. Sometimes courage takes time to build. Just then, Kendrick's phone buzzed. Officer Torres's name appeared on the screen. He put the phone on speaker as Naomi and Brooke listened. Mr. Hale, her voice was clear and professional. We've just received security footage from one of your neighbors from the incident. They've agreed to release it voluntarily. The footage shows the entire confrontation, including several statements Mrs. Langston made that directly contradict her public claims. Brooke looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at the phone broadcasting proof of Sophia's lies. The truth always finds a way, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. More to herself than anyone else. The morning drizzle had turned to steady rain, drumming against the windows like applause for secrets finally spoken aloud. The security footage played on Kendrick's laptop with crystal clarity. The morning sun filtered through his office windows as he, Naomi, and Brooke watched the scene unfold in stark digital detail. The camera's high-mounted angle captured everything. The precise moment Sophia Langston emerged from her house, her aggressive stance, the theatrical way she pointed at Kendrick while making her 911 call. The timestamp shows she didn't even give him 30 seconds, Naomi noted, her pen tapping against her legal pad. No reasonable conversation, no attempt to verify anything. The audio was surprisingly clear. Sophia's voice rang out, "There's a suspicious man trying to steal a car. You need to send someone immediately." Then moments later, "He must have stolen it. People like that don't own cars like this." Brooke winced at Sophia's tone. She sounds so certain, so entitled to her assumption. They watched as the police arrived. The footage caught Sophia's dramatic performance, her insistence that Kendrick's valid documentation must be fake. Her phone raised high as she narrated her version of events to her social media audience. "Every false claim," Kendrick said quietly. "Every escalation. All preserved." Naomi was already typing rapidly on her phone. "I'm contacting Rachel Bennett from the Chronicle. She's the one who ran the initial story about Sophia's complaints against you." "Will she listen?" Brooke asked. "Rachel's smart," Kendrick replied. "She knows something wasn't right about Sophia's version. We're not giving a defensive statement. We're showing her everything, the footage, Brooke's documents, the whole pattern." Kendrick nodded slowly. No more measured responses. No more letting them control the narrative. Within an hour, Rachel Bennett sat in Kendrick's office, her professional skepticism evident. As she reviewed the security footage for the third time, she paused frequently, taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Langston's public statement claimed you were confrontational," Rachel observed. "This shows quite the opposite." "Keep watching," Naomi suggested. The footage continued to play. Sophia's voice became increasingly shrill as she demanded the officers arrest Kendrick, even after they verified his identification. The camera caught her exact words. "I don't care what his papers say. He doesn't belong here." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "That's explicitly different from what she told me." "Now," Naomi said, sliding Brooke's documents across the desk, "let's talk about why the Langstons felt entitled to act this way." For the next 2 hours, they walked Rachel through the evidence. Brooke's careful documentation revealed years of systematic discrimination, denied promotions, buried complaints, vendor fraud. Each piece connected to Phillip Langston's office. The driveway incident wasn't isolated, Kendrick explained. It was a symptom of a culture Phillip built where certain people were considered inherently suspicious, inherently unworthy. Rachel studied an email thread showing Phillip explicitly blocking a minority candidate's promotion. "This goes beyond bias. This is intentional discrimination and financial fraud," Naomi added, pointing to the vendor contracts. "Notice how these numbers never match the final reports." Brooke spoke up softly but firmly. "I watched it happen for years. Every time someone questioned it, they were pushed out or passed over. Rachel looked up from her notes. Why come forward now? Because truth matters more than comfort, Kendrick replied. Because systems don't change unless someone forces them to face evidence they can't dismiss. The reporter nodded slowly. This isn't just about clearing your name anymore, is it? It never was, Kendrick said. Sophia's accusation was just the public face of something much uglier, something that hurt a lot of people for a long time. Naomi's phone buzzed with another email from Officer Torres. The police are formally amending their incident report. They're noting multiple false statements made by Mrs. Langston during the call and at the scene. Kendrick stood, his decision made. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning and contact the board. We need an emergency session before that. Going public with everything? Rachel asked. Everything, Kendrick confirmed. The footage, the documents, the patterns of discrimination, the financial irregularities. No more pieces, the whole truth. Brooke straightened in her chair. I'll testify if needed. I'm done being afraid. Naomi was already making calls. I can have the board assembled by morning. The press conference could follow at 11. Perfect, Kendrick said. Time for everyone to see exactly what kind of company Phillip Langston was running and exactly what kind of assumptions his wife acted on. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as they prepared. Rachel continued reviewing documents, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Brooke organized her files chronologically, building an undeniable timeline of corruption. Naomi coordinated with the board secretary and communications team. Kendrick watched them work, feeling the weight of years of silent injustice finally shifting. Tomorrow, truth would have its say, not in whispers or buried files, but in clear daylight with cameras rolling. The security footage played one final time on his laptop. Sophia Langston stood frozen on the screen, pointing in accusation, so certain of her power to define reality. She had no idea she was being recorded, no idea that her moment of entitlement would become evidence of everything wrong with the system she represented. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation as cameras focused on the podium. Kendrick Hale stood perfectly still, his dark suit crisp, his expression composed. The morning light streamed through tall windows, highlighting the screen behind him, where the security footage waited to play. Thank you for coming, he began, his voice steady and clear. Recent events have brought serious issues to light. Rather than offer interpretations, I'll present evidence and let it speak for itself. He nodded to his technical team. The security footage began to play. The room fell silent as Sophia Langston's recorded voice filled the space, her accusations sharp and clear. They watched her immediate aggression, her refusal to listen, her performance for her phone camera. When she declared that people like that don't own cars like this, several reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Langston made multiple demonstrably false statements to police during this incident, Kendrick continued, displaying a time-stamped list. Officer Torres has provided an amended incident report noting each one. A reporter raised his hand. Did Mrs. Langston attempt to contact you after learning your identity? Yes, Kendrick replied. She offered what she called an apology. But it's important to understand this incident was not isolated. It reflected deeper problems within the company culture. Brooke Sinclair stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice firm. For years, I documented systematic discrimination in hiring and promotion decisions. She began presenting specific examples. Qualified minority candidates repeatedly blocked, complaints buried, suspicious contracts approved. The reporters' pens moved frantically. The story was visibly shifting under their eyes from a neighborhood dispute to something far more significant. Every decision required Phillip Langston's approval, Brooke explained, displaying email chains. These patterns were intentional and consistent. Rachel Bennett, seated in the front row, asked the question everyone was thinking. How long has this been happening? The documented cases go back years, Kendrick answered. The financial irregularities tied to vendor contracts extend even further. He displayed spreadsheets showing inflated costs and missing funds. The numbers told their own story of systematic corruption. The room had grown completely still. The only sound was the click of cameras and scratch of pens. We've provided complete copies of all documentation to relevant authorities, Kendrick concluded. The board meets in 30 minutes to address these findings. The emergency board session convened in the main conference room. Kenneth Barlow sat rigid in his chair, his usual confidence cracking as he reviewed the evidence packets. Phillip Langston arrived looking polished as ever, but his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. This is a vindictive witch hunt, Philip declared, straightening his tie. Mr. Hale is retaliating because of a simple misunderstanding with my wife. The evidence predates that incident by years, Naomi pointed out. Are you claiming these documents are falsified? I'm claiming context is being manipulated, Philip insisted, but his voice had lost its usual authority. Kenneth Barlow cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take time to review. Every delay protected this behavior, Kendrick cut in. Every review buried another complaint. That ends today. The boardroom door burst open. Sophia Langston stormed in, face flushed with anger. You can't do this to us. We built this company. Mrs. Langston, this is a closed session, Naomi stated firmly. But Sophia was already realizing something had changed. The board members who usually smiled at her looked away. The room had no interest in her performance. Her social currency had suddenly become worthless. All those in favor of immediate termination, Kendrick asked quietly. Hands rose around the table. Even Kenneth Barlow, seeing no escape, raised his slightly trembling fingers. Philip stared at his former allies, watching decades of carefully maintained power crumble in minutes. Effective immediately, Kendrick declared. Security will escort you out. As the Langstons emerged from the building, reporters swarmed. Their cameras caught Sophia's mascara-streaked face, Philip's shattered composure. No amount of polish could hide their fall. Mrs. Langston, do you stand by your statements to police? Mr. Langston, what do you say to allegations of systematic discrimination? Did you knowingly file false reports? The questions followed them across the parking lot, each one stripping away another layer of their carefully constructed facade. Sophia tried to shield her face with her designer handbag while Philip hurried her toward their car, neither of them managing even a semblance of dignity. Back in his office, Kendrick watched the corporate security team sealing Philip's office and securing his files. Computer forensics experts were already preserving evidence. The company's legal team huddled with federal investigators, reviewing Brooks' documentation. The Financial Crimes Unit wants to interview you Monday, Naomi reported, entering with a stack of papers, and 3 civil rights organizations have called about systematic discrimination cases. Kendrick nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond punishment. He studied the organizational chart on his wall, seeing not just what needed to be torn down, but what could be built in its place. Years of qualified people held back, of talent ignored, of potential wasted. That was where real justice would begin. A knock at his door revealed Officer Torres. She stepped in, still in uniform, looking satisfied but professional. The department is reviewing all recent complaints from that neighborhood, she said. Mrs. Langston's name appears in several involving suspicious persons who turned out to be legitimate visitors or residents. Thank you for doing the right thing, Kendrick replied. Truth matters, she said simply, then hesitated. The other officers are watching this case closely. It's changing perspectives. One Sunday morning painted the suburban streets in gentle autumn light. Kendrick's white Rolls-Royce gleamed as he parked it exactly where the confrontation had occurred days before. This time, instead of suspicious faces behind curtains, neighbors gathered openly on their lawns, watching a stage being assembled on the community green. Carla Simmons stood near the podium reviewing her notes. Her new interim regional director badge caught the sunlight. After years of being overlooked, she carried herself with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finally being recognized. Jerome Watkins sat in the front row, his family beside him. His grandchildren wore their Sunday best, beaming at their grandfather. The retirement plaque in his lap acknowledged not just his years of service, but the wisdom that had helped expose the truth. The crowd's bigger than we expected, Naomi said, joining her father near the stage. Word spread fast. Kendrick nodded, watching more cars arrive. Good. This needs witnesses, just like last time, but for something better. Community leaders began taking their seats, pastors, teachers, small business owners. Officer Torres arrived in dress uniform, representing the police department officially. She gave Kendrick a respectful nod, then took her place near the stage. At precisely 10 o'clock, Kendrick approached the microphone. The morning sun warmed his face as he surveyed the gathered crowd. Some faces were familiar from that tense afternoon, but their expressions had changed. Thank you all for coming, he began. Today marks a new chapter, not just for our company, but for this community. First, I'd like to introduce Carla Simmons, our new interim regional director. Carla stepped forward to warm applause. Her voice was strong and clear as she outlined her vision for the department she had helped build from the ground up. Merit matters, she declared. Experience matters. And now, finally, everyone who earns their place will find the door open. Kendrick returned to the microphone. Next, we honor someone whose dedication deserves full recognition. Jerome Watkins, please join us. Jerome walked slowly to the stage, his grandchildren watching with shining eyes. Kendrick presented the plaque personally, reading the inscription. For decades of excellence, integrity, and courage to speak truth when truth was needed most. The old dispatcher's hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. Thank you, he said simply, but his eyes held decades of vindication. Then came the announcement they had gathered for. Kendrick unveiled the New Hale Foundation for Business Excellence, a comprehensive program combining scholarships, apprenticeships, and mentoring opportunities. The first phase would fund dozens of positions prioritizing qualified candidates who had been previously overlooked. Success shouldn't depend on who you know, Kendrick explained. It should depend on what you can do, what you're willing to learn, and how hard you're willing to work. He gestured to a group of young people seated near the stage, the first cohort of scholarship recipients. They sat tall, dressed professionally, ready to begin their journey. Among them was Brooke Sinclair's nephew, who had dreamed of joining the company, but watched others with fewer qualifications move ahead of him. The applause was genuine this time, not the polite golf claps of charity events. These were people who understood the difference between handouts and opportunities. They had seen both sides of power, the kind that crushed and the kind that lifted. Officer Torres stepped forward next, not to speak, but to present Kendrick with an official commendation. The police department was acknowledging his composure during the confrontation and his commitment to community improvement. The gesture carried weight. Law enforcement publicly choosing truth over prejudice. As the ceremony concluded, neighbors who had stood silent during Sophia's accusations now approached to shake Kendrick's hand. Some offered quiet apologies for not speaking up. Others asked about applying to the scholarship program for their children. The atmosphere had transformed from suspicion to possibility. Carla gathered her new team for a photo, her smile radiant. Jerome's grandchildren ran across the grass, playing near the Rolls-Royce, without a single worried glance from their parents. The car that had sparked such drama now seemed to belong exactly where it was parked. Notable in their absence were the Langstons. Their house stood empty, shades drawn. Sophia's carefully cultivated social circle had evaporated. The country club had quietly revoked their membership. Their carefully constructed world had crumbled because they couldn't imagine a different kind of power, one built on merit instead of privilege. As the crowd began to disperse, Kendrick watched the scholarship recipients talking excitedly with their new mentors. He saw Carla directing her staff with natural authority. He noticed Officer Torres chatting easily with community members who once would have viewed her with suspicion. The late afternoon sun caught the Rolls-Royce's hood ornament, sending bright reflections across the lawn. Naomi appeared at his side carrying their briefcases. Ready to go? Kendrick took one last look at the scene. The mingling crowds, the discarded programs blowing across the grass, the stage being dismantled in the golden light. Everything that had happened here, both the ugly and the triumphant, had served a purpose. Yes, he said simply, reaching for his car keys. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support the channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.